இது அப்படியே ஒருத்தர் stop. So once again, good morning to dear students. Now regarding the last class review exam, I'm a bit disappointed because you simply, most of you have simply cut and paste the answers. It is such disgusting to see that C table number also is there in the answer. Similarly, C figure number. You are so lazy. That is, see, this is for you, not for us. These classes, in spite of all odds, we are taking classes and you are taking very lightly, for which I am very sorry, and this I have not expected from you. So be serious, and what I have decided is I have not corrected all your papers, so you do not know your marks, and what you do is you have to write all the answers in the notebook, long notebook that is already have started with the first exam. So first, actually I thought you most probably you may copy from the textbook, but you are so lazy that you have just simply cut and paste the answers. Too bad. So for which entire department is there. Actually, most of our assistant professors were telling me about this, but I thought after all they are our students, and so that feeling I used to have before this exam, but now that you have shown your true colors, I will also be like that. Okay. So next is regarding the multiple choice questions. So they are given with an intention to give more information to you. That's why the questions are framed like that. And I am happy your performance is satisfactory. If not good, it is satisfactory. Okay. Now, another thing is regarding the class again and the answers. I think none of you have gone through the presentation or the class material again, because the answers are straight from the test, not at least 1 point from the class I have told you. So you should be concentrating more on the class, hear carefully the class, and then get benefit out of it. So today there is slight change in the program because our dean sir is having some conference, teleconference. So I will start with my class. Today we will start stomach and duodenum, very important topic. So you may get essays either from for carcinoma of the stomach or complications of the stomach like perforation, duodenal stenosis. And you will get a few short notes also, both 2 marks and 4 marks. So concentrate more on this, and so what is the anatomy? So for anatomy, it's very important that we know the arterial supply of the stomach. So stomach is supplied by almost 5 branches. So each one is important depending upon the location of the stomach. It is so richly supplied. In the last class, I think I have told you about the stomach being taken to the almost up to the neck level for carcinoma esophagus, where it is made into a tube depending on the blood supply of 1 or 2 arteries. There is so rich anastomosis that the stomach can survive any extent of damage to the arteries. So this is the 2 arcades. These are the 2 arcades of stomach supply. Now let us go to the lesser curve. So lesser curve, on the left side there is left gastric artery, which is a branch of celiac axis, which is a direct branch of aorta. So you can see that this is the aorta, from where celiac axis, 3 arteries will be coming from it. This is the left gastric artery, this is the splenic artery, and this is the common hepatic artery. So from celiac axis, left gastric artery will be arising and then supplying the proximal part of the lesser curvature. Then on the right side, there is right gastric artery, which is a branch of common hepatic artery. So here you can see this is common hepatic artery and this is the branch that is given to the lesser curvature of the stomach. This is right gastric artery. These 2 will anastomose. Okay. So that is about the lesser curve blood supply. Then if you go to the greater curve, there is right gastroepiploic artery and left gastroepiploic artery. So the right gastroepiploic artery is a branch of gastroduodenal, which is in itself a branch of common hepatic. So this is the gastroduodenal artery. So it is giving 2 branches. One is the right gastroepiploic artery. This will in turn anastomose with the left gastroepiploic artery, which is a branch of splenic artery. So this is how 2 arcades are formed for the blood supply of the stomach. Then you have duodenum. Of course, duodenum is supplied by gastroduodenal artery, which is again a branch of common hepatic artery. What is the significance of this artery? Can anybody tell me the significance of gastroduodenal artery in relation to the stomach and duodenum? Because of its locality, it can cause some problem. Yes, very good. So bleeding from peptic ulcer, not erosion, peptic ulcer. So the bleeding, yeah, most commonly damaged, not damaged, it is the artery can be eroded, not due to perforation. It is because the artery is eroded, the ulcer is eroding the artery will bleed torrentially and cause hematemesis. Because it is on the posterior surface of the duodenum, as you can see here, so the posterior part of the first part of the duodenum. So this is duodenum, first part. Here, ulcer in the posterior can erode the gastroduodenal artery and then it can lead to bleeding. Okay, so that is the significance of gastroduodenal artery. So that's why passing behind the first part of the duodenum, bleeding duodenal ulcer. Then of course superior pancreaticoduodenal artery is also there to supply both pancreas and the duodenum, first and second parts. Then you have fundus of the stomach, for which short gastric arteries, which are in turn branches of splenic artery, the so-called vasa brevia. They are so short. You can see here splenic artery giving branches to the fundus of the stomach. So like this, they will be arising in gastrectomies. We have to ligate these branches. Okay. So that is the blood supply of the stomach. Now let us go to the various cells of gastric mucosa, because the gastric mucosa will secrete so many substances. Like if you go from proximal to distal, chief cells which are mainly in the proximal part of the body of the stomach will secrete the pepsinogen, which will be converted to pepsin. So chief cells, pepsinogen. Then you have parietal cells, which are mainly in the distal part of the body. Mainly, of course, entire body is there, but mainly in the distal part. If chief cells are in the proximal part, distal part, there are parietal cells, which will secrete acid. So then you have throughout the gland, but mainly around pylorus and duodenum, mucus glands will be secreting mucin, which will create the so-called mucus barrier, gastric mucosal barrier, which will prevent both the acid and pepsin digesting the stomach wall. So that is the function of the mucus. Then you have any number of endocrine cells, the gastrin being secreted by G cells, which are mainly concentrated in the antrum. This gastrin will regulate the acid secretion. Then you have ECL, enterochromaffin-like cells in the body, which will be secreting the histamine, which is again in turn related to acid secretion. Then you have D cells secreting somatostatin. There are various neuropeptides also secreted. Of late, there is another substance that is ascribed to stomach, that is so the ghrelin. What is the role of ghrelin? Can anybody tell me? Role of ghrelin. Role of ghrelin. Yeah. So very good. So increased food intake and appetite. It controls appetite. So if ghrelin is more, there will be more appetite. A patient will be taking more food. And basing on this, how it is exploited, this factor is exploited. Now that we know that ghrelin is secreted by the stomach, it is, that fact is utilized for what? It is easy now. Yeah, bariatric surgery. So, bariatric surgery is, this factor is exploited. Bariatric surgery, because if you reduce the stomach size, particularly the fundic part, so this part, if you can reduce that, that's how sleeve gastrectomy is done. So that fundic part is removed, so that ghrelin substance is almost eliminated. So that is how this bariatric surgery, sleeve gastrectomy, has evolved. Now, let us go to the investigations. So, of course, all of you know by this time that the gold standard investigation for upper GI tract up to almost the second part of duodenum is the upper GI endoscopy, fiber optic flexible endoscopy. The thing is, solid state camera is at the tip. That's how it can take very beautiful pictures of the inside, which you can visualize in the monitor. Instead of directly seeing, you can visualize it in the monitor. The advantage is being your resident or your student can also see what you are seeing inside. So that is the advantage of this camera at the tip and attached to a monitor. So the upper GI endoscopy, of course, all of you know that you can not only visualize, you can take a bit for biopsy, and of late, gastroenterologists are doing various procedures. In the esophagus, you have learned that we can do endoscopic myotomy also, pyloromyotomy, the so-called POEM. So, various interventional techniques for the portal hypertension and dilatations are all carried out by endoscopy. Okay, but of course, it is not without much dangers. Perforation being the commonest complication of endoscopy. And another thing is inadequately performed scoping. So I know one famous physician of our city. He died of carcinoma of the stomach. Of course, he was endoscopied once or twice, not finding anything. But ultimately, when it has become advanced, then they have seen the growth in the fundus of the stomach. So that's how inadequately performed scopy will lead to delay in diagnosis, and the prognosis will become poor. Now, what is this optical biopsy? So, just with the endoscopy, you can, to certain extent, guess the pathology. Not just like our biopsy, but you can see the cells and their staining pattern, so that you can before sending the specimen for pathologist, you can diagnose or guess to a large extent the likely pathology. This is because in gastric ulcers, it is very difficult to distinguish a benign ulcer from a malignant ulcer. That's why now we say any ulcer in the stomach, treat it as not treat, you have to think of malignancy unless it is excluded. Okay. So this is the upper GI endoscopy, and this is the view how it looks like inside the stomach, particularly at the pylorus. So these are the gastric folds. Previously, we used to rely mainly on contrast radiology. Previously, the so-called barium meal study. We used to call it barium meal series. This is how a barium-filled stomach will look like. So this is the stomach. This is the first part of the duodenum, so-called duodenal cap. So we used to rely heavily on this previously. Now it is not being done very regularly unless for research purpose. So what are the other investigations? Of course, ultrasound. You can detect any mass in the stomach, particularly the GIST, the gastrointestinal stromal tumors. So GIST is you can diagnose by ultrasound, and ascites inside the abdomen, liver secondaries, lymph nodes, if they are big enough, you can diagnose them on ultrasound alone. Then extension of both endoscopy and ultrasound is the endoluminal ultrasound. So you know that stomach is having 4 layers, but in ultrasound, it will be depicted as 5 layers because the mucosa is having muscularis. So muscularis mucosa is another layer. So total 5 layers you will be able to see. What is the advantage of endoscopic ultrasound? It is the depth up to what extent, because you know that T stage depends upon the layer to which the growth has spread. Just like esophagus, here also, in stomach also, carcinoma stomach, if it is T1, it involves both mucosa and submucosa. T2 means it has involved the muscularis propria. So T stage can be known in 90% of cases by endoscopic ultrasound. This is available in Visakhapatnam, and when I was a director, I have purchased it for the gastroenterology department of Andhra Medical College. So we have this equipment. Then it can also pick up the lymph nodes, perigastric lymph nodes, particularly the sensitivity being 80%. And the CT scan may not pick up lymph nodes which are less than 1 centimeter or 5 to 1 centimeter, 5 millimeters to 1 centimeter, whereas those can be picked up by endoscopic ultrasound. Similarly, we have a laparoscopic ultrasound. So laparoscopy itself can detect the peritoneal secondaries, which are very tiny, small nodules of 1 or 2 millimeters that no scan can pick up. Whereas laparoscopy, you can see them, and ultrasound, it can also pick up these nodules. Similarly, liver nodules also of few millimeter size, if they are on the on the surface of the liver, they can also be picked up by both laparoscopy and ultrasound, laparoscopic ultrasound. So this is the endoscopic ultrasound. You can see that the stomach is in layers. So this is the layers. These are the layers. Endoscopic ultrasound. In pathology, you can see some masses here. And what are the other investigations? So of course, you know, CT scan. This is mainly to stage the carcinoma of the stomach. You can see both the primary lymph nodes and liver secondaries mainly. Of course, MRI has not much role in the stomach. And PET, again, as I told you in esophagus, here also it can detect a CT scan stage 3 may become a PET CT stage 4. That means the stage migration has occurred after your investigation. So before PET CT, you might have picked up 100 cases for surgery, whereas after PET CT, that will be reduced to 90. That means 10% of cases whom you thought they are surgically curable will become incurable after PET CT. This PET CT is also available in Visakhapatnam, and it is mainly there in the cancer hospitals. Okay. Then another investigation that is being done by interventional radiologists is angiography. So selective angiography, you can catheterize that particular, just like coronary angiography, you can catheterize that particular artery, and that is exploited by doing therapeutic embolization. So sometimes endoscopy, particularly Delafoy's disease, endoscopy may be normal. So in those cases, you can do angiography and then you can arrest the bleeding. So these are the investigations of the stomach. Now, so you can see that how a CT scan here, this is a carcinoma of the stomach. You can see it is a contrast X-ray. That's why this is the irregularity you are seeing. So carcinoma of the stomach. So now let us go to the next topic, that is gastritis. So gastritis, there are number of varieties of gastritis, but two types are very, very important, and why they are important is both of them will predispose to carcinoma, both of them. So this type A gastritis, the so-called autoimmune gastritis. Here, there are circulating antibodies to parietal cell. Parietal cell, as you know, as already we have discussed, it will secrete acid. So once there are antibodies to parietal cell, it will result in achlorhydria. This achlorhydria can lead to carcinoma. So frequently it is associated with pernicious anemia. Why? Because of this gastritis, there is malabsorption of intrinsic factor, that is vitamin B12 will be malabsorbed because of lack of intrinsic factor. So three important points of this type A gastritis are: one, it is autoimmune antibodies against parietal cells. Two, it can predispose to cancer because of achlorhydria. Three, it is associated with pernicious anemia. Now, there is other variety, the more commoner type, that is type B gastritis. It is induced by H. pylori. Mainly it is seen in the antrum, whereas this is diffuse. This is mainly in the antrum. It can cause, along with gastritis, what is called as pangastritis, peptic ulcer disease. This is chiefly blamed nowadays, H. pylori, and there may be intestinal metaplasia, and then that will also cancer. So H. pylori has got three problems as far as stomach is concerned. One is it can produce gastritis. Second is it can produce peptic ulcer. Third is it can predispose to cancer. Of course, it is also blamed for lymphomas, but it's not well substantiated. So type B gastritis is the routine one. So that can also predispose to cancer. Of course, there are any number of other varieties like the reflux gastritis after gastric surgery. The bile can see after GJ vagotomy, the bile can go back to the stomach. So there is anastomosis here, and the bile from the duodenum will go like this, and then instead of going like this, it can go into the stomach. So that is called as reflux gastritis. So the reflux gastritis mainly after gastric surgery, and to some extent it can be treated with the prokinetic agents like the metoclopramide, cisapride, and other things. Then another one is erosive gastritis. This is very common, erosive gastritis, because of abuse of both NSAIDs and alcohol. The treatment being stopping them and then giving prokinetic agents and PPIs. There is another variety called as stress gastritis, which can also cause stress ulcers in the stomach. So mainly seen in ICU patients, in shock, in burns, and others. That's why we routinely give PPI, that is particularly some pantoprazole, to ICI patient, irrespective of the disease, to prevent stress gastritis and then leading to hematemesis also. Similarly, sucralfate is also another one that can mainly restore the mucosal barrier, sucralfate. What are the other types of gastritis? So this is very dangerous condition. This may be given as a short notes for you, Menetrier's disease. If you can write hypertrophy of mucosal folds. This is the main macroscopic picture. The mucosal folds which you have seen earlier on endoscopy, there will be hypertrophy. And there is excessive mucus production, and it will also, because acid is less, there may be hypochlorhydria. And remember, whenever there is hypo or achlorhydria, it is pre-malignant. So Menetrier's disease, one of the pre-malignant conditions of the stomach, right? Other varieties are there. They are only of academic interest. like lymphocytic gastritis, again caused by H. pylori. There is the infiltration of these lymphocytes in the stomach walls. Similarly, eosinophilic gastritis, this is allergic, and it can also be treated with steroids and chrome glycate. Then granulomatous, it is something similar to Crohn's disease or TB, or it may be an extension of Crohn's disease or TB of the stomach, granulomatous gastritis. Then you have gastritis in AIDS, and they may be infected with cryptosporidiosis. Okay, so these are the types of gastritis, of which once again let us remember that type A gastritis is autoimmune. There is achlorhydria, which can predispose to carcinoma, and there will be associated pernicious anemia. Whereas type B, caused by H. pylori, can cause 3 diseases: gastritis, peptic ulcer, and cancer. Right? So this is how erosive gastritis, you can see erosions, multiple erosions are there. Now let us go to peptic ulcer. Peptic ulcer previously was the bread and butter of a surgeon, because we used to operate at least 1 or 2 cases of peptic ulcer, that is mainly chronic duodenal ulcer, daily. Now, because of the usage of PPIs and eradication therapy to H. pylori, this is now, I don't say it is on the wane, but most of them are being treated by the medical personnel like gastroenterologists. Here, coming to the peptic ulcer, the nomenclature itself is a misnomer. So, there is not pepsin digestion, there is acid digestion. But it is somehow named as peptic ulcer. Of course, pepsin will also can digest, but without acid, see, in the absence of acid, ulcers will heal. Only absence of acid, not pepsin, but still ulcers are healing. That means pepsin has limited role in peptic ulcer causation, right? So it occurs in high acid levels, the gastrinomas, the so-called Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, wherein in the gastrinoma triangle, there will be gastrinomas. So that will cause any amount of acid, and the acid production is so high that PPIs we used to give not twice or thrice the, usually we will give omeprazole some 10 or 20 milligrams, whereas in ZE we used to give 80 milligrams, thinking that it is a local problem, until we knew that it is not a local problem, it is because of gastrinoma. Then we are now doing this excision of this gastrinoma tumor. Now it can be cured. Otherwise, previously we used to give very high doses of PPI to treat Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. See, peptic ulcer causation, etiology, of course. Now, H. pylori is more and more blamed. In addition, NSAIDs. These 3 are deadly combination. H. pylori, NSAIDs, and cigarette smoking. Once you stop these 2 and then practice hygienic ways you can control peptic ulcer. That is the extent to which these are involved in causation of the peptic ulcer. Of course, duodenal ulcers are very common than gastric ulcers. As I told you earlier, if there is gastric ulcer, you think of malignancy rather than a benign gastric ulcer. So what are the sites of peptic ulcers? This is number one. First part of duodenum is the number one site for peptic ulcer. Lesser curvature, next common. Then stoma, that is gastrojejunostomy. There it can develop this peptic ulcer. Stomal ulcer, we call it as stomal ulcer. Esophagus, because of some gastric cells, that is parietal cells in the esophagus, it can also cause to peptic ulcer. Then this is another example. One of the complications of Meckel's diverticulum is bleeding because of ectopic gastric epithelium present there. Can you tell me, suppose there is ectopic tissue in local tissue, what do you call it? What is that called as? Very good. Choristoma. So the main difference between choristoma and hamartoma is hamartoma. Yeah, somebody has given hamartoma. That's why I have mentioned hamartoma also. Hamartoma, it is local to that area. Hamartoma means there may be overgrowth of lymphatic tissue, nervous tissue, or blood tissue, that is hemangiomas. Whereas choristoma, it is not local. For Meckel's diverticulum, gastric epithelium is not local. So that is called as choristoma. So these are the common sites for peptic ulcer. Once again, commonest is first part of duodenum. Next is lesser curvature, stoma, esophagus, and Meckel's diverticulum. Now, previously we used to artificially divide acute peptic ulcer, chronic peptic ulcer, like that. But now it is recognized that it is a spectrum from acute superficial to chronic deep penetrating ulcers. The same disease, depending upon the stage at which you see, you will diagnose it as acute or chronic. So that's why now we don't call chronic duodenal ulcer chronic gastric ulcer. It is same disease, so peptic ulcer alone is enough. So gastric ulcers may become malignant, and malignant ulcers may mimic benign. That's why I told you, whenever there is a gastric ulcer, until proved otherwise, treat it as a malignant ulcer. Previously, again, this is another one which we used to. So actually, we are also unlearning some things. Previously, as I told you, acute and chronic, there was artificial division. Similarly, symptoms of gastric ulcer and symptoms of duodenal ulcer, we used to put a table and then divide gastric ulcer like this symptoms, duodenal ulcer like this. But now it is clear that symptoms, you cannot, basing on symptoms alone, diagnose a particular one as gastric, another one as duodenal ulcers. So the treatment nowadays is not surgery. Previously, chronic duodenal ulcer means surgery, surgery, surgery. That's all, no other treatment. Now, it is anti-secretory agents, particularly the PPIs and H. pylori eradication. These are the two things that are required. And if the patient is not following properly your advice, it may recur because of this H. pylori reinfection, or the infection itself is not completely controlled. So elective surgery is now more and more less done because of fear of the sequelae of surgery. There are so many. Previously, it was for postgraduates, it was an essay question. For undergraduates, it was a short notes, complications of gastric surgery. Now that we do rarely, particularly for peptic ulcer, this question may not be important for you. Of course, still surgery is done for complications of peptic ulcer. So what are the complications? Perforation, bleeding, and stenosis. These three complications are still there. In fact, they are more and more they are occurring. So we have to treat them by surgery alone almost. So I think I will stop here before going to duodenal ulcer. In the next class, we can discuss in detail chronic duodenal ulcers. And so now you can tell me any doubts you have or any comments you want to make. In the class so far we have taken. Any doubts you have, or I still have not taken the lymphatic supply, but when carcinoma of the stomach is discussed, I will discuss about lymphatic supply of stomach. That itself is a question for you, lymphatic supply of the stomach. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, surgery for bile reflux, again, it's a big topic, not for you. For your level, don't discuss that, because that's a big topic for postgraduates. And whatever surgery we do, it is not so effective. Okay, still the patient may have. Only thing is, you have to again dismantle the anastomosis and then put another type of passage. Now, somebody asked me to explain choristoma. So the difference I will tell you. So hamartoma is already, I gave you examples of hamartoma. That is the tissue overgrowth in an area that is native. So where there are blood vessels, there may be overgrowth of blood vessels, that you call it as hemangioma. Similarly, lymph vessels. Similarly, nerve fibers, neurofibroma. They are all called as hamartomas. Whereas in choristoma, tissue that is not native. So in Meckel's diverticulum, if you see pancreatic tissue or if you see gastric mucosa, that is not native for it. Meckel's diverticulum you should see only because it is in the terminal part of the small bowel. You should see only small bowel mucosa. But here, there may be pockets of stomach mucosa, pancreatic mucosa like that, thereby leading to complications like in stomach, it can be bleeding and ulceration, whereas in the pancreatic, if it is pancreatic tissue, it can also produce pancreatitis, thereby leading to inflammation and other problems. So that is choristom, right? Okay, so let us stop here, and tomorrow you will have again urology class, and on Monday Professor S.V. Kumar will be taking clinical discussion on ulcer, right? Thank you.